Before the beginning, in the beginning, there was nothing. No earth, no sky, no light, no darkness. Just an endless void where silence reigned supreme and chaos was the only law. But what if I told you that this nothingness was not empty, but pregnant with possibilities so vast and terrifying that when they finally erupted into existence, they would give birth not only to our world, but to the very concepts of order, justice, and civilization itself. This is the story of the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic that predates the Bible by over 1,000 years, a tale so fundamental to human understanding of existence that it shaped the religious and philosophical thinking of entire civilizations, and continues to influence how we think about the origins of everything we know and experience. 4,000 years ago, in the fertile valleys between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, Babylonian priests and scribes recorded on clay tablets what they believed to be the true account of how the universe came into being, how the gods themselves were born from primordial chaos, and how a young hero god named Marduk saved creation from being devoured by the forces of ancient evil that sought to return everything to the formless void from which it had emerged. This was not merely a creation story, but a cosmic drama of such scope and power that it served as the foundation myth for one of history's greatest civilizations, explaining not just how the world began, but why order must constantly struggle against chaos, why justice must be defended against injustice, and why civilization represents humanity's greatest achievement in the face of forces that would reduce everything to primordial nothingness. The tablets that preserved this ancient epic were discovered in the ruins of Ashurbanipal's great library at Nineveh, buried for over 2 millennia beneath the sands of Iraq, waiting for modern archaeology to resurrect them and reveal to the contemporary world the sophisticated cosmological thinking that flourished in ancient Mesopotamia when most of the world was still struggling with the basics of agriculture and urban organization. The very name Enuma Elish comes from the epic's opening words meaning "when on high," setting the stage for a narrative that begins before time itself existed and chronicles the emergence of everything we recognize as reality from a state of primordial chaos that the ancients understood as both terrifying and creative in its infinite potential. But this is more than just an ancient story. It's a window into how our ancestors understood fundamental questions about existence, purpose, and meaning that continue to challenge human thinking today. The cosmic battle between order and chaos that forms the heart of the Enuma Elish reflects psychological and social truths that remain as relevant now as they were 4,000 years ago, when Babylonian civilization was reaching heights of sophistication that would not be matched for centuries to come. The epic's exploration of themes like generational conflict, the relationship between individual heroism and cosmic responsibility, and the price that must be paid to establish lasting order speaks to experiences that transcend cultural boundaries and historical periods. Here's where I want to pause and ask you something that gets to the heart of human nature and cultural understanding. From which country are you watching this video? Because every culture has creation stories that attempt to explain how the world began and why it functions the way it does, and I'm fascinated by how different societies have approached these universal questions. The Mesopotamians created this epic of cosmic conflict, but what stories did your ancestors tell about the origins of everything? Drop your country in the comments and share what you know about your culture's creation myths. I'd love to see how different traditions around the world have tackled the same fundamental mysteries that puzzled ancient Babylonian thinkers. The physical setting in which the Enuma Elish was created and preserved tells us as much about its significance as the content of the epic itself, because this was not just entertainment or even religious instruction, but state ideology of the highest order, recited annually during Babylon's New Year festival, when the king himself would participate in ritual reenactments of Marduk's victory over chaos, symbolically renewing the cosmic order that guaranteed his kingdom's prosperity and security. The epic served multiple functions simultaneously. It was creation myth, political propaganda, religious doctrine, and philosophical treatise all rolled into one masterwork of ancient literature that demonstrated the sophistication of Mesopotamian intellectual culture at its peak. The language in which the epic was composed reflects the international character of ancient Near Eastern civilization, as Akkadian had become the diplomatic lingua franca of the region, allowing this Babylonian creation story to influence the mythological thinking of peoples from Egypt to Iran, from Anatolia to the Persian Gulf, creating a shared cultural foundation that facilitated trade, diplomacy, and intellectual exchange across vast distances and diverse populations. The epic's influence can be traced in the mythologies and religious systems of numerous ancient civilizations, demonstrating how powerful stories can transcend their original cultural contexts to become part of humanity's common intellectual heritage. The cosmological vision presented in the Enuma Elish reveals a sophisticated understanding of the universe as a dynamic system where opposing forces must be balanced to maintain stability and order, a concept that influenced not only religious thinking but early scientific attempts to understand natural phenomena and cosmic structures. The ancient Mesopotamians who created this epic were also accomplished astronomers, mathematicians, and engineers whose observations of celestial movements and natural processes informed their mythological representations of cosmic forces and divine powers, creating a creation story that combines imaginative storytelling with genuine insights into the nature of existence and change. The preservation of the epic through centuries of political upheaval, foreign conquest, and cultural transformation speaks to its enduring power and relevance, as successive generations of scribes, priests, and scholars recognized in this ancient narrative something essential about human experience that needed to be transmitted to future generations, regardless of changing political circumstances or religious fashions. The tablets on which it was recorded were copied and recopied, translated and adapted, studied and memorized by countless individuals who found in its cosmic drama reflections of their own struggles to create meaning and order in a world that often seemed chaotic and threatening. The rediscovery of the Enuma Elish in the 19th century revolutionized modern understanding of ancient Near Eastern civilization and its contributions to human cultural development, revealing that long before Greek philosophy or Hebrew monotheism, Mesopotamian thinkers had developed sophisticated concepts about cosmic order, divine justice, and human responsibility that provided intellectual foundations for much of what we consider fundamental to civilized existence. The epic's influence on subsequent religious and philosophical traditions becomes clearer as we trace its themes through later literature and belief systems that adapted its insights to new cultural contexts and spiritual needs. As we prepare to enter this ancient world of gods and monsters, cosmic battles and divine politics, creative acts and destructive forces, we need to understand that we're not just encountering primitive superstitions or outdated mythology, but engaging with some of humanity's earliest attempts to grapple with questions that continue to challenge us today. Questions about the nature of existence, the source of order in the universe, the relationship between individual action and cosmic responsibility, and the ongoing struggle between the forces that create and sustain civilization and those that would destroy it and return everything to primordial chaos. The stage is set, the cosmic drama is about to begin, and we're about to witness the birth of everything we know and recognize as reality, emerging from a state of nothingness so complete that even the gods themselves had not yet come into existence. This is the story of how something came from nothing, how order emerged from chaos, how light conquered darkness, and how a young hero god saved the universe itself from forces that would have destroyed it before it had a chance to flourish into the magnificent cosmos that surrounds us today. The primordial waters. When on high the heaven did not exist, nor the earth below, there existed only Apsu, the freshwater ocean that lay beneath all things, and Tiamat, the saltwater sea that stretched beyond all horizons, and between them flowed Mumu, the mist that rises where fresh and salt waters meet, creating the first stirrings of consciousness in a universe that had known only the endless sleep of non-existence. These were not gods, as we understand them, but fundamental forces of nature given personality and purpose, primordial principles that embodied the very essence of water in all its forms, the creative potential that lies dormant in the depths, waiting for the right conditions to give birth to life, consciousness, and eventually the complex civilizations that would one day worship the gods born from these ancient waters. Apsu and Tiamat existed in perfect harmony for countless eons, their waters mingling in eternal embrace while Mumu danced between them, neither fully belonging to one nor the other, but serving as the bridge that allowed their different essences to communicate and interact in ways that would eventually prove fertile beyond imagination. This was the age before time began, when nothing changed because nothing needed to change, when the universe consisted of nothing but these three primordial entities floating in endless space, content in their simplicity, and unaware that their peaceful coexistence contained within it the seeds of transformation that would eventually revolutionize existence itself. But cosmic evolution follows laws as inexorable as those that govern the birth and death of stars, and even in this seemingly static paradise of primordial waters, change was beginning to stir in ways too subtle to be perceived by consciousness that did not yet possess the sophistication necessary to recognize the significance of what was happening. The constant mingling of Apsu's fresh water with Tiamat's salt water, mediated by Mumu's transformative mist, created conditions that had never existed before in the history of the universe, generating new possibilities and potentials that lay dormant like seeds, waiting for the right season to sprout into unprecedented forms of existence and awareness. The first children born from this union of primordial forces were Lamu and Lahamu, beings who represented the first stirrings of differentiation in a universe that had known only unity, the first emergence of individual consciousness from the collective unconsciousness of the primordial waters. These ancient gods, whose names evoke images of muddy banks where land first emerges from water, embodied the principle of boundary and definition that allows separate things to exist while still remaining connected to their source, creating the foundational concepts of identity and relationship that would prove essential for all subsequent cosmic development. Lamu and Lahamu, in turn, gave birth to Anshar and Kishar, gods who represented the emerging differentiation between heaven and earth, sky and ground, the vertical axis that would eventually organize all subsequent creation into meaningful relationships and hierarchical structures. Anshar, whose name means whole sky, embodied the principle of expansive consciousness reaching upward and outward, while Kishar, whole earth, represented the grounding force that provides stability and foundation for all creative activity, establishing the fundamental polarity between transcendence and immanence that would characterize divine consciousness throughout the epic. These second-generation deities possessed capabilities and characteristics that their primordial parents could never have imagined, demonstrating how creative evolution tends to produce offspring that surpass their creators in complexity, sophistication, and power while still remaining dependent on the foundational principles that gave them birth. Anshar and Kishar were the first gods to possess individual personalities, distinct preferences, and independent wills, marking the transition from the purely unconscious creativity of the primordial waters to the self-aware creativity that would eventually reshape the entire cosmos according to conscious design and purposeful intention. Here's something that I think speaks to universal patterns in both individual and cultural development. This progression from undifferentiated unity through increasing differentiation to complex organization mirrors processes we see everywhere, from biological evolution to technological development to the growth of human consciousness itself. From whichever country you're watching this, you've probably observed similar patterns in your own culture's development or even in your personal growth from childhood to adulthood. What do you think about this idea that creation requires a movement from simple unity to complex organization? Do you see similar patterns in the development stories from your own cultural tradition? Let me know in the comments what parallels you notice between this ancient creation myth and modern understanding of how complex systems develop. From Anshar and Kishar came Anu, the god of heaven who would establish the first principles of cosmic order and divine authority. And from Anu came Ea, also called Enki, the god of wisdom and fresh water who would prove to be one of the most crucial figures in the cosmic drama about to unfold. Ea inherited his great-grandfather Apsu's dominion over fresh water, but combined it with intellectual capabilities that far exceeded anything the primordial waters had possessed, creating a synthesis of natural power and conscious intelligence that would prove essential for the survival of the younger gods in the conflicts that lay ahead. But with each new generation of gods, the cosmos became more crowded, more complex, and inevitably more noisy as these divine beings pursued their own interests, developed their own relationships, and engaged in the kinds of activities that conscious entities naturally pursue when they possess power, intelligence, and free will. What had once been the perfect silence of primordial unity gradually gave way to the bustling activity of a divine society where different personalities interacted, competed, cooperated, and inevitably came into conflict over questions of authority, territory, and fundamental principles of cosmic organization. The younger gods established their own territories, developed their own spheres of influence, and began the work of creating and organizing the cosmic structures that would eventually provide the framework for all subsequent existence. But their activities inevitably disturbed the primordial peace that Apsu and Tiamat had enjoyed for countless eons before their offspring had complicated the simple perfection of the original cosmic order. The noise, activity, and constant change that the younger gods brought to the universe represented everything that the primordial forces found alien and threatening to their essential nature. This generational conflict between the established order of primordial simplicity and the emerging complexity of conscious creativity reflects tensions that appear in every culture and historical period, as older generations struggle to understand and accept changes introduced by their successors, while younger generations push boundaries and explore possibilities that their predecessors find disturbing or incomprehensible. The cosmic scale of this conflict in the Enuma Elish transforms what might seem like ordinary family tensions into a fundamental struggle about the nature and direction of cosmic evolution itself. Apsu, who had enjoyed countless eons of peaceful existence, found the constant activity and noise of his divine descendants increasingly intolerable, while Tiamat, though more patient and tolerant of change, began to share her consort's frustration with the disruption that the younger gods had brought to their formerly perfect cosmic harmony. The primordial waters that had given birth to consciousness now found that consciousness had developed in directions that threatened to destroy the very conditions that had made their own existence possible and meaningful. Mumu, the faithful advisor who had long served as mediator between Apsu and Tiamat, now found himself in the position of counseling his ancient masters about how to deal with the unprecedented challenges posed by their increasingly powerful and independent descendants. His advice would prove to be fateful, not only for the immediate conflict, but for the entire future course of cosmic development, as the decisions made in this primordial crisis would determine whether the universe would continue evolving toward greater complexity and consciousness or would be returned to the simple unity that had characterized its earliest phase. The stage is set for a conflict that will determine the fundamental character of reality itself, as the forces of primordial simplicity prepare to confront the powers of evolving complexity in a battle that will reshape the cosmos and establish the principles that will govern all subsequent existence. The peaceful age of the primordial waters is coming to an end, and the universe is about to discover whether its future lies in returning to original unity or advancing toward unprecedented levels of organization, consciousness, and creative possibility. The conspiracy of chaos The discord that had been building in the cosmic order finally erupted into open conflict when Apsu, driven beyond endurance by the constant noise and activity of his divine descendants, made a decision that would transform the entire character of existence and set in motion events that would determine whether the universe would continue its evolutionary development or be returned to the primordial silence from which it had emerged. His resolution to destroy the younger gods represented more than paternal frustration. It was a fundamental rejection of the principle of cosmic evolution itself, an attempt to halt the natural development of consciousness and complexity that had been unfolding since the first stirrings of awareness in the primordial waters. Gathering his ancient power around him like a cloak of absolute authority, Apsu summoned Mumu to his side and revealed his terrible plan: the complete annihilation of all the younger gods whose activities had disturbed the perfect tranquility that had characterized the cosmos during its earliest phase of existence. This was not to be mere punishment or correction, but total destruction, the return of the universe to the state of undifferentiated unity that had existed before consciousness had complicated the simple perfection of the primordial waters with its demands for growth, change, and creative expression. Mumu, whose role as mediator between different cosmic forces had given him unique insight into the tensions building within the divine family, enthusiastically endorsed his master's plan, arguing that the younger gods had indeed overstepped their proper bounds, and that their destruction was necessary to preserve the fundamental order that gave meaning and purpose to cosmic existence. His counsel reinforced Apsu's determination while also providing the strategic planning necessary to implement a solution that would require careful coordination and overwhelming force to achieve its objectives without allowing any of the younger gods to escape or organize effective resistance. But Tiamat, though equally disturbed by the changes that her descendants had brought to the cosmic order, found herself torn between loyalty to her ancient consort and maternal affection for the divine children who had emerged from their union, creating an internal conflict that reflected the broader cosmic tension between preservation of established order and acceptance of evolutionary change. Her hesitation to embrace Apsu's genocidal solution revealed the complexity of her character and her recognition that destruction of the younger gods would eliminate not only the problems they had created, but also the creative potential they represented. The plan that Apsu and Mumu developed for destroying the younger gods demonstrated both the ruthless efficiency of primordial power and the fundamental misunderstanding that characterizes attempts to halt evolutionary processes through violence and suppression rather than integration and guidance. They would use their control over the primordial waters to unleash floods and chaos that would overwhelm the younger gods before they could organize defensive measures or escape to regions beyond their reach, returning the cosmos to its original state of undifferentiated unity through the simple expedient of eliminating everything that had differentiated itself from that unity. However, cosmic conspiracies are difficult to keep secret when they involve forces as fundamental as the primordial waters, and word of Apsu's plan inevitably reached the younger gods through the subtle intelligence networks that develop naturally when conscious beings must coexist in complex social systems. The discovery of their grandfather's intention to destroy them created the first great crisis of divine civilization and forced the younger gods to confront questions about survival, resistance, and the principles for which they were willing to risk everything they had achieved since emerging from primordial unconsciousness. Ea, the wisest of the younger gods, and the one most deeply connected to the fundamental forces of cosmic creativity, recognized that this crisis required more than conventional resistance or military preparation, because the power that Apsu and Mumu could bring to bear against them was of a completely different order than anything the younger gods had previously encountered. This was not a conflict between equals, but a confrontation between evolved consciousness and the primordial forces that had given it birth, requiring strategies and solutions that transcended ordinary approaches to conflict resolution and power struggles. Here's where I want to explore something that lore I think resonates across cultures and generations. This conflict between established authority and emerging innovation reflects tensions we see everywhere, from family dynamics to political revolutions to technological disruption. From which country are you watching this? Because every society has experienced moments when older ways of doing things come into conflict with new possibilities, and the resolution of these conflicts often determines the future direction of entire civilizations. What examples can you think of from your own culture's history where traditional authority had to confront revolutionary change? How do you think societies can best navigate these transitions without destroying either the wisdom of the past or the potential of the future? Share your thoughts in the comments. The solution that Ea devised for dealing with the threat posed by Apsu demonstrated both his intellectual superiority over the primordial forces and his deep understanding of the magical principles that govern cosmic transformation, as he crafted a spell of such power and subtlety that it could overcome even the ancient authority of the freshwater ocean without destroying the cosmic foundations that supported all existence. This magical working represented more than clever tactics. It was a fundamental assertion of the principle that evolved consciousness possesses capabilities that transcend those of its unconscious origins. Working with precision and stealth that reflected his mastery of the subtle arts, Ea cast his spell upon the primordial waters, weaving enchantments that stripped Apsu of his power while simultaneously preserving the essential functions he had performed in maintaining cosmic stability, ensuring that the destruction of the old authority would not result in the collapse of the systems that depended on his foundational role. This was revolutionary action guided by conservative wisdom, change implemented with careful attention to continuity and stability. The death of Apsu sent shockwaves throughout the cosmos that were felt not only by the gods directly involved in the conflict, but by all the forces and entities that had come to depend on the cosmic order he had helped establish and maintain throughout the earliest phases of universal development. His destruction represented the end of an era and the beginning of a new phase of cosmic evolution, in which evolved consciousness would take responsibility for functions that had previously been performed by unconscious natural forces. Ea's establishment of his dwelling place over the defeated body of Apsu symbolized the transition from unconscious to conscious cosmic governance, as the god of wisdom took up residence at the very source of the life-giving waters, ensuring that their creative power would now serve the purposes of evolved consciousness rather than the simple maintenance of primordial unity. This was not mere conquest, but transformation, the conscious assumption of responsibilities that had previously been exercised through unconscious natural processes. In this new cosmic order, Ea took a wife, Damkina, and together they gave birth to Marduk, the god who would eventually become the central hero of the entire epic and whose destiny it would be to complete the transformation of the cosmos from primordial chaos to organized civilization. Marduk's birth in the dwelling place established over Apsu's defeated form symbolized the emergence of a new type of divine consciousness that combined the power of the primordial waters with the wisdom and purposefulness of evolved intelligence. But the victory over Apsu, though decisive in eliminating the immediate threat to the younger god's survival, created new problems and challenges that would prove even more dangerous than the original conspiracy. Because Tiamat, grief-stricken by the death of her ancient consort and increasingly convinced that the younger gods represented a fundamental threat to cosmic order, began to consider solutions that would dwarf Apsu's planned genocide in their scope and destructiveness. The primordial mother who had given birth to all subsequent existence was preparing to become its destroyer. The transformation of Tiamat from cosmic mother to apocalyptic enemy represents one of the most psychologically complex elements in the entire epic, as it explores how protective love can become destructive hatred when it perceives fundamental threats to what it seeks to preserve. Her evolution from reluctant supporter of Apsu's plan to active champion of cosmic destruction demonstrates how even the most fundamental forces of creativity can become forces of annihilation when they conclude that what they have created has become incompatible with their essential nature and purposes. The second phase of the cosmic conflict was about to begin, and it would prove far more dangerous than anything the younger gods had yet faced, because they would now confront not merely the frustrated authority of Apsu, but the full creative and destructive power of Tiamat, transformed into an engine of apocalyptic vengeance that would threaten not only their individual survival, but the continued existence of the cosmos itself. The birth of a champion. In the cosmic dwelling that Ea had established over the conquered form of Apsu, where the primordial waters now served conscious purpose rather than unconscious repetition, a child was born whose destiny would encompass nothing less than the salvation of creation itself and the establishment of cosmic order that would endure for all subsequent ages of universal development. Marduk emerged into existence not as an ordinary divine infant, but as a being whose every characteristic proclaimed him to be something unprecedented in the history of the cosmos, a synthesis of all the powers and wisdom that had been accumulating through generations of divine evolution since consciousness first stirred in the primordial waters. From the moment of his birth, Marduk displayed capabilities that amazed even his divine parents and grandparents, possessing 4 eyes that could see in all directions simultaneously, 4 ears that could hear every sound throughout the cosmos, and lips that blazed with fire whenever he spoke, creating speech so powerful that it could reshape reality through the simple act of articulation. These extraordinary attributes were not merely impressive displays of divine power, but symbolic representations of the comprehensive awareness and creative authority that would be necessary for the cosmic role he was destined to play in the struggle between order and chaos that was approaching its climactic phase. Ea, recognizing the unique nature of his son, and understanding that Marduk's birth represented the cosmos's response to the growing threat posed by Tiamat's transformation into an agent of destruction, devoted himself to the child's education with intensity and purpose that reflected both paternal love and cosmic necessity. Under his father's tutelage, Marduk learned not only the practical skills necessary for divine leadership, but also the deeper wisdom required to understand the fundamental principles that govern cosmic development and the responsibilities that come with ultimate power over the forces that shape reality. The young god's education encompassed every aspect of cosmic knowledge that had been accumulated since the first emergence of consciousness from the primordial waters, including the magical arts that could manipulate natural forces, the political skills necessary for leading diverse groups of conscious beings, the military strategies required for cosmic-scale conflicts, and most importantly, the philosophical understanding needed to distinguish between changes that serve evolutionary development and those that threaten the foundations of existence itself. As Marduk matured from divine childhood to cosmic adulthood, his capabilities continued to expand in ways that suggested he was becoming something qualitatively different from all previous generations of gods, combining the raw power of the primordial forces with the refined consciousness of evolved intelligence, in proportions that had never before been achieved in the history of divine development. His very presence seemed to stabilize and energize the cosmic order, as if the universe itself recognized in him the champion it had been preparing through all the stages of its evolutionary development. But even as Marduk was developing the capabilities that would eventually make him the savior of creation, Tiamat was undergoing her own transformation in response to the death of Apsu and her growing conviction that the younger gods represented a fundamental threat to everything she valued and sought to preserve in the cosmic order. Her grief over the loss of her ancient consort, combined with her fear of the changes that continued to reshape the universe in directions she found incomprehensible and threatening, gradually hardening her maternal disappointment into apocalyptic rage that would seek nothing less than the complete destruction of everything that had emerged from her creative union with Apsu. The transformation of Tiamat from cosmic mother to destroyer of worlds represents one of the most profound psychological and mythological developments in ancient literature, as it explores how protective love can become destructive hatred when it perceives fundamental threats to what it seeks to preserve, while also examining the cosmic implications of generational conflict when it escalates beyond personal disagreement to encompass fundamental questions about the nature and direction of universal development. Tiamat's decision to create an army of monsters to destroy the younger gods demonstrated both her awesome creative power and her complete abandonment of the nurturing role she had played since the beginning of cosmic development, as she channeled all her maternal energy into the production of beings designed not to contribute to cosmic evolution, but to halt and reverse it through the systematic elimination of everything that had differentiated itself from primordial unity. These monsters represented the dark side of creativity, the potential for generative power to become destructive when it serves purposes that oppose rather than support the fundamental direction of evolutionary development. The creatures that emerged from Tiamat's apocalyptic creativity were unlike anything that had previously existed in the cosmos, combining the raw power of primordial forces with conscious malevolence and destructive purpose that made them far more dangerous than natural disasters or unconscious threats to cosmic order. Serpents with venom instead of blood, dragons that breathed poison rather than fire, scorpion men whose sting could destroy even divine consciousness. These were not merely powerful enemies, but embodiments of the principle that creativity itself could be turned against the purposes it had traditionally served. Here's something that I think speaks to deep truths about human nature and social development that appear in cultures throughout history. This story of how protective love can become destructive hatred when faced with changes it cannot understand or control reflects patterns we see in everything from family relationships to political movements to international conflicts. From whichever country you're watching this, you've probably observed situations where people or groups who started with genuinely good intentions ended up causing harm because they couldn't adapt to changing circumstances. What do you think causes this transformation from protector to destroyer? How can societies and individuals avoid falling into this trap while still maintaining their core values and commitments? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. To lead this monstrous army, Tiamat chose Kingu, a god who represented the principle of primordial authority without the wisdom or restraint that had characterized earlier forms of divine leadership, elevating him to supreme command and investing him with powers that rivaled those of the most ancient cosmic forces. Kingu's appointment as general of the forces of chaos represented Tiamat's complete rejection of the evolutionary development that had produced increasingly sophisticated forms of consciousness and her determination to return the universe to a state where raw power rather than wisdom determined the outcome of cosmic conflicts. The marriage of Tiamat and Kingu symbolized the union of creative power with destructive purpose, establishing a cosmic authority dedicated not to the continuation and development of what had been created, but to its systematic destruction and return to primordial simplicity. This represented a fundamental perversion of the creative principle that had driven cosmic development since the first emergence of consciousness from unconscious unity, transforming the very forces that had given birth to the universe into weapons, designed to destroy everything they had produced. The threat that Tiamat and her monstrous army posed to the established cosmic order was of a completely different magnitude than anything the younger gods had previously faced, because this was not merely a conflict over authority or territory, but an existential challenge to the continued existence of consciousness, differentiation, and evolutionary development itself. The war that was approaching would determine whether the universe would continue its development toward greater complexity and awareness, or would be returned to the undifferentiated unity that had characterized its earliest phase. as news of Tiamat's transformation and her assembly of monstrous forces spread throughout the divine realms. Panic and despair began to grip even the most powerful of the younger gods, because they recognized that conventional resistance would be futile against enemies who possessed both overwhelming power and the advantage of seeking destruction rather than preservation, which meant they could employ tactics and weapons that those seeking to protect cosmic order could not use without destroying what they hoped to save. The cosmic crisis that was approaching would require not just military victory, but the emergence of a form of leadership that could unite all the forces of evolved consciousness while also commanding power sufficient to match the primordial energies that Tiamat could bring to bear in her campaign of cosmic destruction. The universe had spent countless eons preparing for this moment through the gradual evolution of consciousness and the accumulation of wisdom and power in successive generations of divine beings, and now all that development would be tested in a conflict that would determine the fundamental character of reality for all future ages. The stage was set for the emergence of Marduk as the cosmic champion, whose destiny it would be to confront the forces of primordial chaos and either establish the victory of evolved consciousness over unconscious destruction or witness the return of the universe to the formless void from which it had emerged through such struggle and development. The fate of creation itself hung in the balance, and everything that had been achieved since the first stirring of awareness in the primordial waters would either be preserved and elevated to new heights or be destroyed in the cosmic catastrophe that Tiamat was preparing to unleash upon the universe. The Council of Gods, the assembly that gathered in the cosmic halls of Anshar to address the unprecedented crisis posed by Tiamat's transformation into an agent of universal destruction, represented the first truly democratic council in the history of divine civilization, as gods who had previously operated according to hierarchical principles of authority and precedence found themselves forced to collaborate as equals in the face of a threat that could destroy them all regardless of their individual rank or power. This divine parliament faced challenges that had never before confronted conscious beings, requiring them to make decisions that would determine not only their personal survival, but the continued existence of consciousness itself in a universe that seemed poised to return to the primordial unconsciousness from which it had emerged through eons of evolutionary development. Anshar, as the eldest of the gods who had survived Apsu's destruction and retained significant authority over the cosmic order, assumed the role of presiding deity over deliberations that would test every principle of divine governance and cosmic organization that had developed since the first emergence of individual consciousness from collective unconsciousness. His responsibility for guiding these discussions encompassed not only tactical considerations about how to respond to Tiamat's immediate threat, but fundamental questions about the nature of cosmic order and the principles that should govern universal development in whatever form of reality might emerge from the approaching conflict. The initial response to reports of Tiamat's monstrous preparations revealed the inadequacy of conventional approaches to conflict resolution when confronted with enemies who sought not victory or dominance, but the complete annihilation of everything their opponents represented. Because traditional diplomatic and military strategies assumed shared interests in preservation and survival that simply did not exist when one side was committed to universal destruction. The gods discovered that their usual methods of negotiation, compromise, and even warfare were meaningless against opponents whose only objective was the return of existence to non-existence, whose wisdom and magical abilities had proved sufficient. To deal with Apsu's threat through clever strategy and superior understanding of cosmic forces, found himself acknowledging that the challenge posed by Tiamat exceeded his capabilities and required solutions that went beyond anything he had previously imagined or attempted. His confession of inadequacy in the face of this cosmic crisis represented more than personal humility. It was recognition that the evolutionary development of divine consciousness had reached a threshold that required unprecedented forms of leadership and authority to cross successfully, one by one. the greatest of the younger gods who had seemed capable of confronting any challenge the universe might present, found themselves forced to admit that Tiamat's power exceeded their ability to resist or counter through any means at their disposal, creating a crisis of confidence that threatened to paralyze divine decision-making at the very moment when decisive action was most urgently needed. The gods who had successfully overthrown the primordial tyranny of Apsu discovered that their victory had ultimately made possible an even greater threat to their continued existence and everything they had achieved. Anu, the god of heaven whose authority over the cosmic order had seemed absolute and permanent, volunteered to confront Tiamat directly, but his attempt to approach the primordial mother for negotiations or combat ended in ignominious retreat when he encountered the full force of her transformed presence and realized that her commitment to universal destruction made any form of communication or conflict resolution impossible. His failure to even engage with the enemy demonstrated that conventional divine authority was insufficient for dealing with forces that rejected the fundamental premises on which cosmic order was based. The despair that began to settle over the divine assembly as God, after God acknowledged their inadequacy in the face of Tiamat's threat, reflected more than tactical concerns about military capabilities. It represented an existential crisis about whether conscious evolution had developed sufficient resources to defend itself against the unconscious forces from which it had emerged, or whether the universe was destined to experience cycles of development and destruction that made all achievements temporary and ultimately meaningless. In this moment of cosmic desperation, when the greatest powers that had ever emerged from the primordial waters found themselves helpless before the threat of universal annihilation, Ea made a proposal that would transform not only the immediate crisis, but the entire future structure of cosmic governance and divine authority. He suggested that the gods turn to his son Marduk, the young god whose extraordinary capabilities and unique synthesis of primordial power with evolved consciousness might provide their only hope for survival against enemies who possessed both overwhelming strength and absolute commitment to the destruction of everything the younger gods represented. The proposal to elevate Marduk to supreme leadership over all the gods represented a revolutionary departure from traditional principles of divine governance, which had previously been based on age, precedence, and established authority rather than capability and fitness for specific challenges. Ea's suggestion that youth and innovation might succeed where experience and tradition had failed reflected a sophisticated understanding of how evolutionary crises sometimes require solutions that transcend conventional wisdom and established patterns of authority and decision-making. However, Marduk's response to this unprecedented opportunity demonstrated both his wisdom and his understanding of the cosmic principles that would need to govern any successful resolution of the crisis, as he agreed to confront Tiamat and her monstrous army only on condition that the gods grant him supreme and permanent authority over the cosmic order, with power to make laws and decisions that would be binding on all divine beings throughout all future ages of universal development. This was not mere ambitious power-grabbing, but recognition that the challenges facing the cosmos required unified leadership and consistent authority that could act decisively without being paralyzed by competing jurisdictions and conflicting priorities. The conditions that Marduk set for accepting the role of cosmic champion revealed his sophisticated understanding of the relationship between authority and responsibility, as he recognized that effective leadership in the face of existential threats required not only military capability, but also the political power necessary to reorganize cosmic civilization according to principles that could prevent similar crises from arising in the future. His demand for supreme authority reflected not personal ambition, but practical wisdom about what would be required to establish lasting order after defeating the forces of chaos. Here's where I want to explore something that I think resonates across different political systems and historical periods. Marduk's insistence on receiving full authority before taking on the responsibility of saving the universe reflects a fundamental tension between democratic decision-making and the need for decisive leadership in crisis situations. From whichever country you're watching this, you've probably observed debates about how much power leaders should receive during emergencies, and whether extraordinary circumstances justify extraordinary measures. What do you think about the balance between collective decision-making and individual authority? How do societies maintain democratic values while still enabling effective leadership during existential crises? Share your thoughts in the comments. The test that the gods devised to demonstrate Marduk's fitness for supreme cosmic leadership involved his ability to create and destroy through the power of his word alone, as they placed a garment before him and challenged him to make it disappear and reappear through purely verbal commands. This trial was not arbitrary, but represented recognition that the cosmic crisis required leadership capable of reshaping reality itself through conscious will and articulated intention, transcending the limitations that had previously constrained even the most powerful divine beings to work within existing cosmic structures rather than transforming them fundamentally. Marduk's successful completion of this test, causing the garment to vanish and reappear through the power of his spoken word, demonstrated that he possessed capabilities that exceeded anything previously seen in the history of divine development, combining the creative power of the primordial waters with the conscious intention of evolved intelligence in ways that made him potentially capable of not merely defeating Tiamat's forces, but of reorganizing the entire cosmic order according to principles that could ensure lasting stability and continued evolutionary development. The acclamation that followed Marduk's demonstration of his unique powers represented more than recognition of his military capabilities. It was acknowledgement that the universe had produced a being capable of assuming responsibility for the fundamental structure and direction of cosmic development, someone who possessed both the wisdom to understand what needed to be preserved from existing order and the power to implement changes necessary for future stability and growth. The formal investiture of Marduk as supreme king of the gods involved ceremonies and rituals that established precedents for all subsequent forms of political authority and legitimacy. As the divine assembly created institutional frameworks for cosmic governance that balanced individual leadership with collective oversight, ensuring that supreme power would be exercised responsibly while also being effective enough to address whatever challenges the future might present to cosmic order and evolutionary development. The weapons and tools that the gods provided to Marduk for his confrontation with Tiamat were not merely military equipment, but cosmic instruments that embodied the accumulated wisdom and power of all previous stages of divine development, including the bow that could launch arrows with the force of lightning, the net that could capture even the most powerful primordial forces, and the winds that could serve as allies in reshaping the fundamental structure of reality itself. But perhaps most importantly, Marduk received from his divine constituents not merely material support, but their collective confidence and authority, transforming him from an individual god confronting a personal challenge into the representative and champion of evolved consciousness itself in its struggle against the forces that would return the universe to primordial unconsciousness. This transformation of individual capability into cosmic responsibility would prove crucial for the battles ahead, because the conflict with Tiamat would require not only personal courage and power, but the ability to act on behalf of principles and purposes that transcended individual survival and advancement. The prayers and blessings that accompanied Marduk's departure for his confrontation with the forces of chaos demonstrated the gods' recognition that they were witnessing not merely the beginning of a military campaign, but the culmination of all cosmic development since the first emergence of consciousness from the primordial waters, as everything that had been achieved through eons of evolutionary struggle would either be preserved and elevated through his victory or be destroyed through his defeat. The cosmic stage was set for the ultimate confrontation between order and chaos, consciousness, and unconsciousness, evolutionary development, and primordial simplicity, as Marduk prepared to face enemies whose power rivaled the fundamental forces of existence itself while carrying the hopes and dreams of every conscious being that had ever emerged from the creative depths of the primordial waters to seek meaning, purpose, and continued existence in a universe that seemed poised to return to the formless void from which it had so laboriously emerged. The fate of creation hung in the balance as the cosmic champion prepared for a battle that would determine whether the universe would continue its development toward greater complexity and consciousness, or would experience the ultimate regression to primordial unity that would erase every achievement and every possibility that had emerged from billions of years of cosmic evolution and divine development. The battle of cosmic titans, the confrontation between Marduk and Tiamat, began not with the clash of weapons, but with the terrible spectacle of creation's mother transformed into its destroyer, as the young champion of cosmic order found himself face to face with the primordial force that had given birth to everything he sought to protect, now mutated into something so alien and terrifying that even divine consciousness struggled to comprehend the magnitude of transformation that grief and rage had wrought upon the fundamental creative principle of the universe. Tiamat had become something beyond the categories of existence that had previously defined cosmic reality. No longer the nurturing mother whose waters had given birth to consciousness, but a monstrous embodiment of entropy and destruction whose very presence threatened to unravel the fabric of space and time itself, surrounded by her army of abominations that represented every form of corruption and perversion that creative power could undergo when turned against its own offspring and purposes. The monsters that accompanied Tiamat into battle were not merely powerful enemies, but embodiments of perverted creativity, beings that demonstrated how the same forces that had produced the beauty and complexity of evolved consciousness could generate horrors beyond imagination when guided by principles of destruction rather than construction, hatred rather than love, entropy rather than evolution, creating a cosmic army that threatened not only the physical existence of the younger gods, but the very concepts of order, beauty, and meaning that had emerged from primordial chaos. King, leading this monstrous host as Tiamat's chosen general and consort, carried the tablets of destiny that had previously determined the fundamental laws governing cosmic development, but now served as instruments for implementing universal destruction rather than creative order, demonstrating how even the most sacred principles of cosmic governance could be corrupted when placed in the service of purposes that opposed rather than supported the evolutionary development of consciousness and civilization. The initial phase of the battle involved psychological and spiritual warfare that preceded physical conflict, as Tiamat attempted to overwhelm Marduk with displays of her transformed power and the horror of what she had become, seeking to break his will and confidence before engaging in combat that would test not only their relative strength, but their commitment to the principles they represented in this ultimate confrontation between the forces of creative evolution and destructive regression. Marduk's response to this intimidation demonstrated both his courage and his sophisticated understanding of the cosmic principles at stake in their confrontation, as he refused to be overwhelmed by the spectacle of Tiamat's transformation and instead focused on the fundamental issues that divided them, challenging her directly about her abandonment of the nurturing role that had defined her cosmic significance, and her betrayal of everything she had previously created and sustained. The dialogue between Cosmic Mother and Divine Champion that preceded their physical combat revealed the philosophical depths underlying their conflict, as Marduk accused Tiamat of violating the fundamental principles of cosmic development, while she responded by denouncing him and all the younger gods as ungrateful children whose innovations had destroyed the perfect harmony that had characterized the universe's earliest phases of development. This exchange demonstrated that their conflict involved more than personal animosity or power struggles, but represented fundamentally incompatible visions of cosmic purpose and development, with Tiamat seeking to return the universe to its original state of undifferentiated unity, while Marduk championed the continuing evolution of consciousness and complexity that had produced the current cosmic order and held promise for even greater achievements in the future. Here's something that I think speaks to conflicts we see throughout human history and in our own personal lives. This battle between Tiamat and Marduk represents the eternal struggle between those who want to preserve or return to simpler past conditions and those who believe in moving forward to more complex future possibilities. From whichever country you're watching this, you've probably seen this tension in political movements, generational conflicts, or even personal decisions about career and life choices. What do you think drives some people to want to go back to the way things were, while others insist on moving forward to the way things could be? How do you think societies can balance respect for tradition with openness to innovation? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. When words proved insufficient to resolve their fundamental disagreement, the physical battle began with Tiamat's attempt to overwhelm Marduk through sheer primordial power, as she unleashed forces that had been contained since the earliest phases of cosmic development, seeking to demonstrate that evolved consciousness was ultimately no match for the fundamental energies from which it had emerged, and to which it would inevitably return, despite all its pretensions to independence and superiority. Marduk's response revealed the sophisticated strategy he had developed for confronting opponents whose raw power exceeded his own, as he relied not merely on strength, but on intelligence, coordination, and the effective use of tools and allies that multiplied his capabilities beyond what individual divine power could achieve, demonstrating how evolved consciousness could triumph over unconscious force through superior organization and purposeful application of available resources. The cosmic net that Marduk cast around Tiamat represented more than military tactics. It symbolized the principle that chaotic forces could be contained and controlled through the application of conscious intelligence and systematic planning, transforming destructive energy into constructive purpose through the imposition of order and structure that redirected primordial power toward evolutionary rather than regressive ends. The winds that Marduk summoned to aid in his battle with Tiamat demonstrated his mastery over natural forces that could serve conscious purpose when properly understood and directed, as he transformed elements that might have seemed neutral or even hostile into allies that supported his efforts to defend cosmic order against the threat of universal destruction, showing how intelligence could harness environmental resources for specific strategic objectives. The moment when Marduk's arrow pierced Tiamat's heart represented more than military victory. It was the triumph of evolved consciousness over primordial unconsciousness, the victory of purposeful intelligence over chaotic force, the success of cosmic order over universal entropy, establishing principles of governance and development that would characterize all subsequent phases of universal evolution and divine civilization. But the death of Tiamat did not end the battle, as her monstrous army continued to fight with desperate fury, recognizing that their defeat would mean not only their own destruction, but the permanent establishment of cosmic principles that left no place for the kind of regression and destruction they represented, making their resistance a final attempt to preserve at least some possibility for the return to primordial simplicity that their mother had sought to achieve through universal annihilation. The systematic defeat of Tiamat's monstrous forces by Marduk and his divine allies demonstrated that victory over chaos required not only defeating its primary embodiment, but also eliminating all the subsidiary forms of destruction and corruption that chaos could generate, ensuring that the triumph of order would be complete and permanent, rather than temporary and subject to renewed challenge from surviving enemies who might reorganize for future attacks on cosmic stability. The capture of Kingu and the recovery of the Tablets of Destiny represented the restoration of legitimate authority over cosmic development as the principles that should govern universal evolution were returned to the hands of those committed to continued growth and complexity rather than regression to primordial simplicity, ensuring that future cosmic development would serve the purposes of evolved consciousness rather than the destructive impulses of corrupted primordial forces. The victory celebration that followed the defeat of Tiamat and her army marked more than the end of a military campaign. It represented the successful defense of evolutionary principles against their greatest challenge and the establishment of cosmic order on foundations solid enough to support continued development toward even higher levels of consciousness, complexity, and creative achievement than had previously been possible in the history of universal development. The creation of the world. With Tiamat's defeat secured and her monstrous army scattered to the cosmic winds, Marduk faced a challenge that would test his creative abilities as thoroughly as the battle had tested his martial prowess: the transformation of the primordial chaos that had characterized the universe's earliest phase into an ordered cosmos capable of supporting the complex forms of consciousness and civilization that had emerged through eons of evolutionary development. This was not merely a matter of imposing control over existing forces, but of fundamentally restructuring reality itself, according to principles that would ensure stability, beauty, and continued growth for all subsequent ages of cosmic development. The raw material for this cosmic construction project was Tiamat's own body, the physical form of the primordial saltwater sea that had participated in the first creative acts of universal development, but had been transformed through grief and rage into an instrument of destruction that threatened to undo everything those original creative acts had achieved. Marduk's decision to use Tiamat's corpse as the foundation for the new cosmic order represented both practical wisdom and profound symbolism, as he demonstrated how even the forces of destruction could be transformed into instruments of construction when subjected to conscious intelligence and purposeful design. Working with the focused attention of a master craftsman who understands that the quality of his work will determine the welfare of countless future generations, Marduk began the systematic process of cosmic architecture that would transform chaotic matter into ordered structure, creating spatial relationships and temporal sequences that would provide the framework within which all subsequent development could occur safely and productively. This was creation not ex nihilo, but ex chaos, the imposition of meaningful form upon formless substance through the application of divine intelligence and will. The division of Tiamat's body into heaven and earth established the fundamental spatial coordinates that would organize all subsequent cosmic development, creating the vertical axis that distinguished between transcendent and immanent realms, while also providing the horizontal dimensions necessary for complex relationships and interactions among the diverse forms of consciousness that would inhabit the newly ordered universe. This cosmic architecture reflected sophisticated understanding of the requirements for sustainable civilization and continued evolutionary development. The establishment of celestial bodies to regulate time and seasonal cycles demonstrated Marduk's recognition that ordered existence required not only spatial structure, but temporal regularity that could provide predictable patterns for the planning and execution of complex projects, whether divine or mortal, ensuring that conscious beings could develop long-term strategies and sustained commitments without being overwhelmed by chaotic unpredictability that would make systematic achievement impossible. The creation of atmospheric systems to support life and facilitate communication between different levels of cosmic reality showed how the new order was designed not merely to contain chaos, but to actively promote the kinds of development and interaction that had characterized the most positive aspects of divine civilization throughout its evolutionary history, providing environmental conditions that would encourage rather than hinder the continued growth of consciousness and complexity. The establishment of hydrological cycles that would maintain the balance between creative moisture and destructive flood reflected Marduk's sophisticated understanding of how natural forces needed to be regulated to support rather than threaten. the civilized order, creating systems that channeled the creative potential of water while preventing the kind of chaotic deluge that had threatened the younger gods during Apsu's attempted genocide and Tiamat's campaign of universal destruction. Here's something that I find fascinating about this ancient creation story, and I'd love to hear perspectives from viewers around the world. Marduk's approach to cosmic construction shows how order emerges not through the elimination of chaos, but through its transformation into constructive patterns. From whichever country you're watching this, you've probably observed similar processes in your own culture's development, whether in city planning, social organization, or even personal growth where destructive patterns get channeled into positive directions. What examples can you think of where chaos or conflict was transformed into something creative and beneficial? How do you think this ancient insight about transforming rather than eliminating opposing forces applies to modern challenges? Share your thoughts in the comments. The assignment of specific cosmic functions to different divine beings reflected Marduk's recognition that effective cosmic governance required distributed authority and specialized expertise rather than centralized micromanagement of every detail, creating institutional frameworks that balanced unified leadership with local autonomy and individual responsibility. This divine bureaucracy represented one of humanity's earliest explorations of the principles that would eventually govern complex political and administrative systems. Anu received authority over the heavenly realms, with responsibility for maintaining cosmic order at the highest levels of reality and ensuring that transcendent principles continued to guide universal development in directions that served the long-term welfare of conscious beings rather than short-term expedience or factional advantage. His position as supreme divine authority provided continuity with previous cosmic order while acknowledging the new realities created by Marduk's victory over the forces of chaos. Enlil was granted dominion over the atmospheric realms that mediated between heaven and earth, with authority over weather systems, communication networks, and the various forms of interaction that connected different levels of cosmic reality, ensuring that the new order would facilitate rather than impede the kinds of exchange and cooperation that had characterized the most successful aspects of divine civilization throughout its evolutionary development. Ea retained his traditional authority over the waters and the wisdom traditions that had enabled him to defeat Apsu and prepare the way for Marduk's victory over Tiamat, ensuring that the magical and intellectual resources that had proved crucial for defending cosmic order would continue to be available for addressing whatever challenges the future might present to the stability and security of the newly established cosmic civilization. The creation of stellar constellations to serve as celestial markers and divine dwellings demonstrated how the new cosmic order integrated aesthetic beauty with practical functionality, creating environmental conditions that would inspire as well as sustain conscious beings, recognizing that sustainable civilization required not only material security, but also spiritual and artistic fulfillment that could motivate continued commitment to evolutionary development and creative achievement. The establishment of regular festival cycles that would celebrate the victory of order over chaos and renew commitment to cosmic principles showed how Marduk understood that institutional stability required not only effective administration, but also cultural practices that maintained popular support for cosmic order through emotional engagement and spiritual participation in the cosmic drama that had established the foundations of their civilization. The creation of sacred spaces where divine and mortal consciousness could interact demonstrated that the new cosmic order was designed to facilitate rather than prevent communication between different levels of reality, ensuring that the wisdom and guidance necessary for continued development would be accessible to those with the dedication and capability needed to seek and utilize such cosmic resources effectively. But perhaps most importantly, the entire project of cosmic construction reflected Marduk's vision of reality as an ongoing creative enterprise rather than a static structure, designed to support continued evolution and development rather than merely preserve existing achievements, ensuring that the victory over chaos would lead not to stagnation, but to unprecedented opportunities for consciousness to explore its potential and realize possibilities that had never before been available. In the history of universal development, the completion of cosmic construction marked not the end of creative activity, but its elevation to new levels of sophistication and purposefulness, as the ordered universe that Marduk had created from the body of defeated chaos provided the stable foundation necessary for conscious beings to undertake projects and pursue goals that would have been impossible in the chaotic conditions that had previously characterized cosmic existence. The creation of humanity. The newly ordered cosmos that Marduk had constructed from Tiamat's defeated form provided a magnificent stage for cosmic drama, but the divine architect recognized that his creation remained incomplete without conscious beings capable of appreciating its beauty, maintaining its complex systems, and participating actively in the ongoing creative work that would ensure continued cosmic development toward ever greater levels of sophistication and achievement. The universe needed inhabitants who could serve as bridges between divine consciousness and material reality, beings capable of understanding cosmic principles while also possessing the practical skills necessary for implementing divine purposes within the constraints and opportunities of physical existence. The decision to create humanity represented more than cosmic urban planning. It was recognition that the ultimate purpose of cosmic order was not merely to provide security and stability for divine beings, but to generate new forms of consciousness that could participate in the creative work of universal development, contributing their own unique perspectives and capabilities to the ongoing project of cosmic evolution and civilization building that had been initiated with the victory over primordial chaos. However, the raw materials available for this crucial, creative project posed significant challenges, as the defeat of Tiamat and her monstrous army had eliminated most of the cosmic resources that might have served as suitable foundations for new forms of conscious existence. The solution to this dilemma came from an unexpected source. Kingu, the defeated general of Tiamat's forces, whose execution would provide both the material substance and the spiritual essence necessary for creating beings capable of bridging the gap between divine consciousness and material existence. The sacrifice of King for the creation of humanity represented more than practical expedience. It was a profound statement about the transformation of destructive forces into creative purposes, demonstrating how even the enemies of cosmic order could be redeemed through their incorporation into constructive projects that served evolutionary development rather than regression to primordial chaos. Kingu's blood, which had been dedicated to destruction and entropy, would become the spiritual foundation for beings committed to construction and growth. Whose wisdom and magical expertise had proved crucial throughout the cosmic crisis, assumed primary responsibility for the technical aspects of human creation, combining his knowledge of life-giving forces with clay from the newly ordered earth to fashion beings who would possess both the material durability necessary for physical existence and the spiritual sensitivity required for conscious participation in cosmic development and divine purpose. The divine collaboration that produced humanity demonstrated how complex creative projects required the coordinated efforts of multiple divine beings, each contributing specialized knowledge and capabilities that individual gods could not provide in isolation, establishing precedents for cooperative endeavor that would characterize the most successful aspects of human civilization throughout its subsequent development and achievement. The specific design parameters for human consciousness reflected careful consideration of the roles that these new beings would need to fulfill within the cosmic order, as they required sufficient intelligence to understand divine purposes and cosmic principles, while also possessing enough limitation to ensure that their activities would remain within bounds appropriate for their cosmic function and would not threaten the stability of the order they were created to serve and maintain. The breath of divine life that animated the clay forms and transformed them into living, conscious beings represented the most precious gift that the gods could provide to their new creations. sharing something of their own essential nature while also establishing bonds of kinship and responsibility that would connect divine and human consciousness in relationships of mutual benefit and reciprocal obligation throughout all future phases of cosmic development. Here's something that I think speaks to fundamental questions about human nature and purpose that appear in cultures throughout the world. This story presents humanity as beings created specifically to serve divine purposes while also possessing enough freedom and capability to make meaningful contributions to cosmic development. From whichever country you're watching this, your culture probably has its own stories about human origins and purpose that address similar questions about our place in the universe and our responsibilities to higher powers or cosmic principles. What do you think about this idea that humans exist to serve purposes larger than individual survival and happiness? How do you balance personal freedom with cosmic responsibility in your own life? Share your thoughts in the comments. The proposal to elevate Marduk to supreme leadership over all the gods represented a revolutionary departure from traditional principles of divine governance, which had previously been based on age, precedence, and established authority rather than capability and fitness for specific challenges. EA's suggestion that youth and innovation might succeed where experience and tradition had failed reflected a sophisticated understanding of how evolutionary crises sometimes require solutions that transcend conventional wisdom and established patterns of authority and decision-making. However, Marduk's response to this unprecedented opportunity demonstrated both his wisdom and his understanding of the cosmic principles that would need to govern any successful resolution of the crisis, as he agreed to confront Tiamat and her monstrous army only on condition that the gods grant him supreme and permanent authority over the cosmic order, with power to make laws and decisions that would be binding on all divine beings throughout all future ages of universal development. This was not mere ambitious power-grabbing, but recognition that the challenges facing the cosmos required unified leadership and consistent authority that could act decisively without being paralyzed by competing jurisdictions and conflicting priorities. The conditions that Marduk set for accepting the role of cosmic champion revealed his sophisticated understanding of the relationship between authority and responsibility, as he recognized that effective leadership in the face of existential threats required not only military capability, but also the political power necessary to reorganize cosmic civilization according to principles that could prevent similar crises from arising in the future. His demand for supreme authority reflected not personal ambition, but practical wisdom about what would be required to establish lasting order after defeating the forces of chaos. Here's where I want to explore something that I think resonates. Across different political systems and historical periods, Marduk's insistence on receiving full authority before taking on the responsibility of saving the universe reflects a fundamental tension between democratic decision-making and the need for decisive leadership in crisis situations. From whichever country you're watching this, you've probably observed debates about how much power leaders should receive during emergencies and whether extraordinary circumstances justify extraordinary measures. What do you think about the balance between collective decision-making and individual authority? How do societies maintain democratic values while still enabling effective leadership during existential crises? Share your thoughts in the comments. The test that the gods devised to demonstrate Marduk's fitness for supreme cosmic leadership involved his ability to create and destroy through the power of his word alone, as they placed a garment before him and challenged him to make it disappear and reappear through purely verbal commands. This trial was not arbitrary, but represented recognition that the cosmic crisis required leadership capable of reshaping reality itself through conscious will and articulated intention, transcending the limitations that had previously constrained even the most powerful divine beings to work within existing cosmic structures rather than transforming them fundamentally. The establishment of divine order, with the creation of humanity complete and the cosmic architecture firmly established, Marduk turned his attention to the equally crucial task of organizing divine civilization itself according to principles that would ensure effective governance, prevent the kind of conflicts that had nearly destroyed the universe, and create institutional frameworks capable of managing the complex relationships between gods, humans, and natural forces that would characterize the new cosmic order for all future ages of universal development and evolutionary achievement. The divine assembly that Marduk convened to address these organizational challenges represented a fundamental transformation in cosmic governance. As for the first time in the history of divine civilization, the gods gathered not in crisis response to existential threats, but in systematic planning for long-term stability and continued development under conditions of security and prosperity that the victory over chaos had made possible throughout all realms of cosmic existence. The constitutional principles that emerged from these deliberations established precedents that would influence political thinking and institutional development throughout human history, as the gods worked to create systems of authority and responsibility that balanced individual divine prerogatives with collective welfare, ensuring that cosmic governance would serve evolutionary development rather than factional advantage or personal aggrandizement at the expense of universal progress and achievement. Marduk's position as supreme cosmic ruler was formalized through ceremonies and institutional arrangements that established both his authority and his accountability, creating a system of divine kingship that combined effective leadership with constitutional constraints, ensuring that supreme power would be exercised responsibly while also being sufficient to address whatever challenges the future might present to cosmic stability and continued development. The allocation of specific spheres of divine authority and responsibility reflected sophisticated understanding of the requirements for effective administration of complex systems, as different gods received jurisdiction over particular aspects of cosmic operation that matched their individual capabilities and interests, while also contributing to overall cosmic welfare and the maintenance of universal order and evolutionary development. The establishment of regular assemblies where divine beings could discuss policy issues, resolve disputes, and coordinate their activities demonstrated recognition that sustainable governance required not only effective leadership, but also mechanisms for consultation, communication, and consensus building that would maintain unity of purpose while also accommodating diverse perspectives and legitimate interests among the various divine constituencies. The creation of legal codes and judicial procedures for addressing conflicts and violations of cosmic order showed how the gods understood that even divine beings required institutional frameworks for resolving disagreements and maintaining standards of behavior that would protect individual rights while also serving collective welfare and cosmic stability throughout all phases of future development and achievement. The development of diplomatic protocols for managing relationships with external forces and potential threats revealed divine recognition that cosmic security required not only military capability, but also sophisticated approaches to negotiation, alliance building, and conflict prevention that could address challenges before they escalated into the kind of existential crises that had characterized the conflicts with Apsu and Tiamat. Here's something that I think resonates with political development in every culture and historical period. The gods' work to create stable institutions after their victory over chaos reflects the universal challenge of transforming revolutionary success into sustainable governance that can preserve achievements while also enabling continued progress. From whichever country you're watching this, you've probably observed how societies struggle to build lasting institutions after periods of conflict or transformation. What do you think are the key elements that make political systems stable and effective over long periods of time? How do you balance the need for strong leadership with protection against the abuse of power? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. The assignment of specific cosmic functions to different divine departments created a bureaucratic structure that ensured essential services would be maintained reliably, while also providing career paths and advancement opportunities for divine beings who demonstrated competence and dedication in their assigned responsibilities, creating incentive systems that aligned individual ambition with collective welfare and cosmic development. Anu's Department of Heavenly Administration received responsibility for maintaining cosmic order at the highest levels of reality, ensuring that transcendent principles continued to guide universal development while also providing oversight and coordination for the activities of other divine departments whose specialized functions contributed to overall cosmic welfare and evolutionary achievement. Enlil's atmospheric administration assumed authority over weather systems, communications, and the various forms of interaction that connected different levels of cosmic reality, ensuring that the cosmic infrastructure would continue to function effectively, while also facilitating the kinds of exchange and cooperation that supported continued development and civilization building throughout all realms of divine and human existence. Ea's Department of Wisdom and Waters retained traditional authority over magical knowledge, fresh water systems, and the intellectual resources that had proved crucial for defending cosmic order, while also assuming new responsibilities for overseeing human development and ensuring that divine purposes were effectively communicated to and implemented by their newly created mortal partners in cosmic administration. The establishment of specialized divine agencies for managing different aspects of cosmic operation demonstrated how effective governance of complex systems required distributed expertise and coordinated specialization rather than centralized micromanagement, creating institutional frameworks that could adapt to changing conditions while maintaining overall unity of purpose and direction. The creation of monitoring and evaluation systems that would track the effectiveness of divine policies and programs showed how the gods understood that responsible governance required ongoing assessment of results and willingness to modify approaches that proved inadequate for achieving intended objectives, ensuring that cosmic administration would continue to improve and develop rather than stagnate in outdated procedures and ineffective practices. The development of training and development programs for divine administrators reflected recognition that effective cosmic service required not only inherent capability, but also acquired knowledge and developed skills that could be enhanced through systematic education and practical experience under the guidance of more experienced divine beings. The establishment of retirement and succession planning for divine offices ensured that cosmic administration would continue to function effectively even as individual gods moved to different responsibilities or reduced their active involvement in daily administrative activities, creating institutional continuity that transcended individual career patterns and personal preferences. But perhaps most importantly, the entire project of organizing divine civilization according to systematic principles, rather than improvised responses to immediate challenges, represented a fundamental maturation in cosmic consciousness. As the gods demonstrated their commitment to creating lasting institutions that would serve cosmic welfare and evolutionary development throughout all future ages, rather than merely addressing immediate concerns and short-term objectives. The completion of divine organizational development thus marked the transformation of cosmic governance from crisis management to systematic administration, ensuring that the victory over chaos would lead to sustained prosperity and continued development rather than gradual deterioration due to inadequate institutional frameworks and poor administrative practices that might eventually recreate conditions conducive to renewed chaos and conflict. The Cosmic Temple and Sacred Kingship. The final phase of cosmic organization required the establishment of sacred spaces and ritual practices that would maintain continuous communication between divine and human consciousness, ensuring that the cosmic order created through Marduk's victory over chaos would be sustained not merely through institutional arrangements and administrative procedures, but through living spiritual connection that could renew divine purpose and cosmic commitment throughout all future generations of gods and humans alike. The construction of Esagila, Marduk's great temple in Babylon represented more than architectural achievement. It was the creation of a cosmic axis that connected all levels of reality, providing a focal point where divine energy could flow into the material world while human devotion and service could ascend to divine consciousness, establishing a permanent spiritual infrastructure that would support cosmic order through active participation rather than passive maintenance. The temple complex that emerged from this divine architectural project embodied principles of sacred geometry and cosmic symbolism that reflected sophisticated understanding of how physical structures could embody and channel spiritual forces, creating environmental conditions that facilitated rather than hindered the kinds of consciousness transformation and spiritual development that were necessary for effective participation in cosmic purpose and divine service. The ziggurat that served as the temple's central focus represented the cosmic mountain that connected earth to heaven, providing a physical manifestation of the spiritual ladder that conscious beings could ascend through dedication, knowledge, and service, transforming the abstract concepts of cosmic order into tangible realities that could inspire and guide human development toward divine purposes and evolutionary achievement. The ritual chambers and ceremonial spaces within the temple complex were designed to facilitate different types of spiritual activity and consciousness transformation, providing appropriate environments for meditation, prayer, sacrifice, divination, education, and the various other practices that connected human consciousness with divine wisdom and cosmic purpose throughout all phases of individual and collective development. The sacred artifacts and ceremonial objects that furnished these holy spaces were not merely decorative elements, but functional tools for consciousness transformation and spiritual communication, each designed according to divine specifications to serve specific purposes in maintaining cosmic order and facilitating human participation in divine purposes and evolutionary development throughout all future generations. The priesthood that Marduk established to serve in his temple represented a new category of human existence, beings who dedicated their entire lives to maintaining spiritual connection between divine and mortal consciousness, while also serving as intermediaries who could communicate divine will and cosmic principles to human communities that might otherwise lose touch with their cosmic purposes and responsibilities. The training and initiation processes that prepared individuals for priestly service demonstrated how effective spiritual leadership required not only personal devotion, but also acquired knowledge and developed capabilities that could only be achieved through systematic education and practical experience under the guidance of those who had already mastered the arts and sciences necessary for cosmic service and divine communication. Here's something that I find fascinating about this ancient approach to spiritual leadership and social organization: the idea that society needs people specifically dedicated to maintaining connection between human communities and cosmic purposes reflects insights that appear in cultures throughout history. From whichever country you're watching this, you've probably observed how different societies create roles and institutions for preserving spiritual traditions and guiding communities in questions of meaning and purpose. What do you think about the relationship between spiritual leadership and political authority? How do you think societies can best the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic? The eternal struggle continues as we reach the end of this cosmic journey through humanity's oldest creation epic. We find ourselves confronting truths that remain as relevant today as they were 4,000 years ago, when Babylonian scribes first pressed these words into clay tablets that would survive the rise and fall of empires. The Enuma Elish is more than an ancient story. It's a mirror reflecting the eternal human struggle to create order from chaos, meaning from confusion, and civilization from the raw materials of existence itself. The battle between Marduk and Tiamat that we've witnessed represents conflicts that rage in every human heart and every human society. The tension between preserving what we've inherited and creating what we need for the future, between honoring tradition and embracing innovation, between the security of the familiar and the promise of the unknown. These ancient Mesopotamians understood something profound about the nature of existence. That chaos is not our enemy to be eliminated, but our raw material to be transformed. Think about your own life for a moment. Every achievement you've made, every relationship you've built, every problem you've solved has involved taking something chaotic, confusion, conflict, uncertainty, and imposing order upon it through conscious effort and purposeful intention. You are Marduk in your own cosmic drama, facing down the forces that would return your world to primordial simplicity while working to create something more complex, more beautiful, more meaningful than what existed before. Here's my final question. For you, and I want to hear from every corner of our global audience, from whichever country you're watching this, what chaos in your own life or your society needs a Marduk to transform it into something creative and beneficial? What ancient Tiamats of tradition, habit, or fear are you battling in your personal journey toward growth and achievement? The Mesopotamians gave us this story not just as entertainment, but as a template for understanding our own struggles and victories. What does this 4,000-year-old epic teach you about your own capacity to create order from the chaos that surrounds us all?